Good evening. The House of Commons had a day's rest today from scandals and rumours of scandals. Instead, they got a budget. Michael Wilson's third budget. What kind of budget? First, here's Ted with a rundown.
The Workers' Compensation Board was argumentative, petulant, and denied a claimant of natural justice. That's what the Supreme Court of BC said in deciding in favor of Angelo Testa in his case against the WCB. Later with Webster, Barbara Bluman, lawyer in this landmark case. But first, Michael Wilson's third budget is out, and the opposition isn't impressed. Gasoline, cigarettes, air travel, and junk food will all cost more. The good news, according to Wilson, is that economic renewal is on the way up, except in the West. In the studio with Webster, a panel of experts on how this budget will affect all Canadians.
But just before we get to the panel, we're asked to believe that there are 675,000 new jobs in Canada. They must all be in Toronto and Southern Ontario. We're told that the unemployment is the lowest in a decade and that it'll be down to 9% by 1987. It's 1987. Here, it's over 13%. We're told that mortgage rates are down 3%. Housing starts are up without subsidies. And economic renewal is really working, and more growth, more jobs, more confidence, and a better image for Canada, except for the scandals. But let's hear the reaction from the two principal opposition leaders in the House of Commons before I go to the panel.
It's a smug budget. What Minister of Finance is really telling the country, wait till next year when we get closer to an election and we may have something for you. He's put the poor on hold, the hungry on hold, the homeless on hold, the unemployed on hold, the students on hold, single families. Really, he's said to somebody standing in line at a food bank in Vancouver, from my riding of Vancouver Quadra, wait till next year. He's saying to the unemployed in the lower mainland of Vancouver that I represent, wait till next year.
It's a total lack of economic leadership. I'm frankly amazed by it. The average family doesn't expect miracles, but was looking for some fairness. We thought we were going to get some tax breaks. The average family is going to get a tax increase, $65 to $100. And perhaps most serious of all is the regional development aspect of what's going on in the country. If you look at the economy, 80 to 90% of the growth that has occurred in the South Central Ontario region. That's excellent for Canadians there. But for everywhere else, for the past couple of years, has been almost no mitigated disaster. And looking at Mr. Wilson's own figures in this budget, as incredible as it sounds, the government's going to be spending in the coming year about $3 billion less in regional development, where it's really needed, than in the year it was elected.
And now my panel. Here I have Oksana Exell, Director of Provincial Affairs for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And over here I have David Schreck, economist, CUNC, but he's here for the Pacific Group. And of course Doug Hayhurst, a senior tax advisor for Price Waterhouse. Mr. Hayhurst, in a capsule comment, what do you make of this budget of Wilson's?
Mr. Wilson's reflecting himself. He believes that he shouldn't interfere in the economy, and he's not going to. He's hoping for real business activity to pull us out of the mess we're in. And he doesn't think pouring money into the government money into a black hole is going to help.
Is this bad or good?
It's good.
From your point of view. Let's go to David Schreck with a different political complexion.
Well, in going through the budget speech that was printed, we noticed that he deviated from his text. And our friend Michael Wilson ended up spending more time talking about mobile veterinary clinics than he did about job creation. So much for jobs, jobs, jobs. I mean, this budget is a disaster. It is going to slow down what is already low economic growth.
Well, Oksana, small federation of independent business, what's your official reaction or unofficial reaction to this? He calls it non-interventionist, he calls it a disaster. What do you call it for your people?
Well, we're nonpartisan, so of course I'll take the middle road, but I would say that I definitely disagree with David. I think it's a budget that will promote job creation, but job creation through the small business sector, which has been producing 97% of the jobs. What he did was retain all the positive measures that were brought in during the last budget, and having seen the success those measures have produced, he's decided to hang tough with them.
Well, I run a small business. I have 130 employees, and the simple move of just increasing the frequency with which we have to pay the withholding taxes is going to cost my nonprofit society $6,000 a year. It's going to cost a lot of other companies a lot more than that. In fact, if you express the $1.2 billion that the federal government expects to grab by having the taxes paid twice a month rather than once a month, it amounts to more than a 10% increase in business taxes.
Well, just a
That's
minute.
hardly non-interventionist.
Let me get
That's
in
a government
here.
out to slow down the economy.
Let me get in here so we, the common people, understand this. As I gather it, if you as a corporate employer have to send more than $15,000 in withholding taxes to the government for your income tax deductions for your employees, for CPP, UI, and all the rest of it, you must now send it in a much faster means. Is that right?
You send it twice a month rather than once a month.
Well, what harm is in that?
Well, as a result, you lose the interest income. And the point is that up from the time the income tax was invented until January 1st of '88, when this goes into effect, that interest income was part of the income of companies. Now they are going to lose that.
But surely you'd expect some contribution from the business sector towards deficit reduction. Where do you think that you can get that?
I fully agree that business taxes should be increased and personal taxes decreased. All I'm saying is that this sneaky little government that claims it's non-interventionist is in fact increasing the business tax in excess of 10%.
But let's face it, David, he's not changing the rules of the game. All he's saying is that we're going to improve the way that that government conducts its business.
Doug, can this simple method of saying send us the money you collect for the employees quicker, could that really be deleterious to middle-sized businesses?
It's going to cost small businesses and middle-sized businesses working capital, and that's going to cost them money. But I agree with Roxana that you've got to take the money from somewhere if you're going to get the deficit anyway under control. And the government's saying, this isn't your funds to begin with. It's government money. You're holding it in trust for us. That's always been the rule of the land. We want you to hold it in trust for a shorter time rather than a longer time.
All right, let's go to the little people. We will not talk about these disgusting people who insist on smoking. No one can complain about the 4%. Is it 4% on cigarettes? 3 cents
That's right,
a packet.
3 cents a pack.
What else happens to the little man in this budget, Doug?
Well, the main thing that's going to come out of the little man is the cost of gasoline. Everybody who drives a car, rides a motorcycle, is going to pay more for their gasoline, and that's the big chunk of dollars that Mr. Wilson's looking for.
At least it's not the 18 cents Joe Crosby once promised.
Per gallon, that's right.
But let's not forget that it's not just the consumer that's going to be hit by that. The mining industry in British Columbia, the forestry sector, they'll be hit by the increases in gas. So again, he's hitting both at the consumer end and the corporate end.
But isn't he doing that to help the Alberta oil industry a little bit? $355 million, I suppose, towards their troubles.
There isn't really anything in here that he's giving back to Alberta. This is not an expenditure budget. He's not giving money to anybody in this one. He's doing some fine-tuning to equalize on the excise tax side or the federal sales tax side, but he's not really giving money to anybody. This is a stand-pat budget, which you wouldn't expect anything different. Having said he's going to have big tax reform in May, you'd hardly expect him to start doing big changes now.
He's admitting some past mistakes and rectifying them. I mean, remember we shot ourselves in the foot. The United States moved in and went after our shake and shingle industry, and we got so mad about it we taxed imported books. Now, some of us had a little trouble making the connection between shakes and shingles and books, but at least this time round he said he was wrong and he's taking the tax off of the books.
Off the books, off the computer parts, and off the Christmas trees. But he's leaving the tax, he's preventing the export of cedar bolts and cedar logs.
Sure, and that's a commitment. I think that our members in that industry really need that boost. They've been doing a hell of a job in getting their act together in terms of marketing their product. They've been getting, and this is just another really good boost that they need.
Yeah, that's a sensible restriction. What we have to worry about is, did Wilson back off of computer parts, Christmas trees, and books because he realized it was stupid to do it in the first place? Or did he back off because of pressure from the United States that shows we are even weaker in those free trade discussions?
Can anyone explain to me this business about the interest on pre-1982 Canada savings bonds? Does that affect the ordinary person who holds older bonds?
Well, it affects somebody who was holding a pre-1982 bond. They would have had to report interest income in 1987. And that's before the bond matured, before they got the cash necessarily. Now the bond matures in 1988. That's when they get their cash. That's when they have to pay tax and the interest. He's just made it a little bit more equitable.
Did I see something in the budget that it was going to cost a lot more in individual tax payments? Several billions?
Not in this budget. what they're talking about is future tax reform. That's pie in the sky. We don't have any idea what they're going to do. The big item in terms of tax payments is this paying twice a month by companies, and that hits the companies, not the individuals. The impact on the individuals is going to be in hidden taxes. Well, you don't hide the tax at the gas pump. Everybody's going to get mad about that. And you don't hide the tax if you're dumb enough to still smoke. But other taxes are hidden.
He made a mention about tax loss trading.
Well, what he's done is he's reaffirming the problem that he has with people using gimmicks to reduce his tax take.
Oh, like BC's gimmick and trying
Like
to get
BC's
in with
gimmick.
the unit.
Sure, like BC's gimmick on the tax on the SkyTrain. What he's saying in November and again in January, he put out press releases. We have lots of legislation by press release now, rather than waiting for a budget. He put out fairly technical changes to prevent people from buying somebody else's losses. He's just trying to increase the perception of fairness of the system.
I think that's fair enough, considering he's trying to bring in that major tax reform bill that he starts to set the stage on. It's going to be a tough bill and with a lot of changes. And I think going back to what David said, pie in the sky, this tax reform stuff may be pie in the sky. What I would have liked to have seen in that budget is some specifics, even a timetable as to what he's talking about with tax reform.
I think he did give us some hints. He said one will come out in May with a white paper. I hope to get legislation by November. There was some comment on that, which means it could be implemented if Parliament would move speedily. It could be implemented, say, next year. But I think that may be pie in the sky, getting Parliament to move speedily. But he did say a couple of little hints as he went through. He said, one, we're going to use credits, not exemptions. So exemptions are where you get a deduction in calculating your income, and it's more beneficial to the richer taxpayer, quote unquote. If you use a credit, it gives the same dollar amount to the rich and the poor, and therefore he's still going to use the tax system as an income redistribution tool.
But he's going to go for the tax credit, which comes off everybody's payable tax equally.
That's right, comes off every tax
What about
equally.
job creation? I made a snark in the mark at the beginning, obviously thinking they're all very healthy in central Canada and we're in disastrous strait. Is there anything in this which gives any job creation at all?
He did not use the word job creation at any point in his speech. What he did say is that between 1984 and today, 650,000 jobs were created. Well, now, you have to realize part of the sleight of hand that went on there. We went through one of the worst recessions since the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. A lot of the jobs that came back were part-time and temporary jobs rather than full-time jobs. So what happened is if you eliminated a full-time 40-hour-a-week job and replaced it with 3 part-time 10-hour-a-week jobs.
That was 3 new jobs.
That's 3 new jobs. It is phony. There are not 650,000 new jobs there.
Last figures that I've seen, though, from Employment Immigration Canada indicate that there is a net increase in jobs created in British Columbia for the first time in 5 years. So there's obviously some, as minimal progress is being made, it's being made, and I think...
Is there anything in this for small business, really?
Well, look, small business is the engine of growth. It is the sector that's going to produce their jobs. If you've got a government that believes in non-intervention, that believes staying off the backs of small business, believes addressing some of the inequities in taxation when it concerns small business, you're talking about job creation.
More with my panel and your calls too after the break. Well, those of us who fly, we all get gouged on the airport tax, another $4 up to a maximum of 50. Snack foods, I couldn't understand that one.
What he's trying to do in the snack foods is he's saying, last time I put a tax on candy bars, and what that means is it's more expensive to buy candy bars than it is to buy a granola bar. So he's trying to equalize it out. Again, he's saying government shouldn't make one business more competitive than the other. So he's just putting a snack tax on.
That applies to potato chips and cheesies and all these things.
Well, they're all replacement for candy bars.
It's called the chintzy tax. Last time they hit your cat, this time they hit you.
The cheesy tax, indeed. Now, what else was it? Federal sales tax is the silent killer. Now, he's made some changes in the tax, but is he going to bring in the BTT, the business transfer tax, next year?
Well, he's been very vague about that in the budget. I think he mentioned that the manufacturer sales tax is inequitable and there are problems with it, but he really worked hard at staying away from any specifics or even actually saying business transfer tax, which really does worry us because it shows that he's going to keep us in the dark until it descends.
Who knows, the way
think-
things are going in Ottawa, he might be Prime Minister this time next year.
Well,
Then we'll get it for sure.
If he believes it's the silent killer, the sales tax, I think he should read his own background documents, because in 83-84, that tax represented 18.8% of the total tax take. Last year, it represented 21%. So under this Conservative government, the tax take from the silent killer has been increasing.
Been going up. Are you afraid of the business transfer tax?
You betcha. I mean, he calls the MST the silent killer, where BTT is just a killer on the list.
Value-added tax.
It's a value-added tax of a different ilk, but
hidden tax.
it's
You've got
a
to
problem.
get your money from somewhere. If you lower personal rates and increase corporate only marginally, then you're going to get it from somewhere.
You could get it from someplace if we put Canada back to work and more of us were paying taxes. Then we could afford
That's
to lower
right.
the tax
It's
for you
perfectly
and
easy
me.
to put
Well,
Canada
it
back to
doesn't
work.
make sense if you're expecting the small business sector to create those jobs. It doesn't make sense that hobbling them with this new paper burden.
But you must think he's
And
wonderful.
what you have to do for that small business sector is give their consumers, expand their market, give them people with spending power, so the small business has a market to cater to.
That's fallacious, isn't it?
Well,
Don't you
we
dare.
believe it's fallacious, sure, but we do need those. Sure, we need bigger markets, and that's why a lot of our small business people are for.
We need a world recovery for our primary resources, let's face it, in British Columbia. Unless we're going to become a nation of lotto buyers and sellers, gambling casinos.
Are you opposing Bill's scheme in
I
Whistler?
most
or-
certainly am.
Gosh,
Go ahead.
Jack.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of comments here. I've got a real problem here in regards to when a tax expert, like such as the fellow on your panel,
Mr. Hayhurst.
yes, says that he's real happy with the budget. I, as a hourly wage earner, get real uneasy about that because the type of people that he represents aren't my type of cat. That's my first thing. The second thing is if small business is supposedly the engine of industry and the backbone of the economy, etc., we've had a Conservative government in this province for God knows how long. We got a Conservative government in Ottawa. Why ain't it happening in BC?
Yeah, good question.
Good question.
Well, Bill Bennett certainly had his ideas, and I don't necessarily, a lot of them did not, in fact, support the business sector. Bill Bennett was a mega project man. He believed in mega projects, and that's a lot of the focus of the last government,
You see, but
Another
also to
answer
you,
might be that
you
the
see, Doug,
philosophy's wrong.
you gave me a good clinical opinion. A good, solid, you're happy to see the deficit go down. The projected increase is slower than was first anticipated. Is that right?
Yes.
From 34 billion to 29.3.
He hopes to get down to 29.3.
Now, from your point of view, as a taxman, that's good, solid, conservative behavior.
He's doing what I would want him to do. He believes that if you give money back to the individual, they'll spend it. That'll help your people. That'll help everybody.
Yeah, but it won't help everybody. Sir, the people that you represent, because I'm just
I
assuming
represent
this,
guys
okay,
from a one-man
are a
consulting
tax
firm.
expert. The people that you work for, they've got a lot of dollars to invest, and they've got a lot of money to hide.
Well, some of them do and some of them don't. You're on a, he regards you as a political animal and you're not. You're a tax advisor.
That's right.
See?
Well,
What are you snickering about? Next one. Go ahead, please.
Just two quick questions. One, was there any mention about the Picasso deduction, what I call the Picasso deduction, the $500,000 lifetime capital gains exemption?
No mention. That guy's a good caller, that fellow, but he's on every night. You know, I like him very much indeed, but make it every second night, will you? Go ahead, please.
Oksana, you seem to be quite pleased with the budget, and I can't really understand why. I see an increased frequency in those withholding tax collections. That's going to cost money. I see taxes going up on consumers. That's going to take spending money out of their hands. I see nothing in the way of regional development. We still haven't seen the impact of those tariffs on British Columbia. I can't see how you are representing British Columbia businessmen, small business, and are saying that this is a good budget for businessmen, small businessmen in British Columbia. I mean, where do you draw this conclusion? I just don't see it.
First of all, the withholding, the remittance changes will really affect businesses that approximately have 75 employees and over. That's 97% of the businesses in 95% of businesses in British Columbia have 20 employees and less. So.
But nevertheless, a lot of your small businesses are dependent on...
Not a lot of our small businesses. I'm saying that it will probably hit the medium-sized business sector and the larger business sector. It will not touch the small the vast majority of businesses in British Columbia will be unaffected by it.
Because it's a 15,000 limit. If you
Exactly, and that's about, if you
matter
look
how
at the
you
average
cut it,
industrial wage,
it's-
75 employees.
But that tax has to
Just a minute.
No matter how you cut it, it's going to take $1.2 billion out of the economy, according to the estimate books that we have before us. And it's not going to help us to suck another $1.2 billion out of the economy. That
Go ahead,
works.
please.
Yeah, Jack, I had one question. I watched the budget this afternoon, and you did a lot of talk about unleaded and leaded gasolines and taxes and so on and so forth. Can you tell me exactly, or can any of your panel tell me what he was talking about? I mean, we already pay an extra 3 cents a gallon now for unleaded gas. What's this budget? What was he talking about there in all this gas and
Doug?
leaded and unleaded gas?
Okay, here we go, Doug.
What he's saying is that he's going to increase tax on both kinds of gasoline by a penny a liter, but right now leaded gasoline has about a third of a cent less per liter tax on it than does unleaded. And he's going to equalize that, so both types of gas are going to have the same government tax on them.
And he's going to phase out unleaded gas altogether by 19...
He's going to phase out leaded gas, and he's going to up the tax on unleaded gas to equal the tax on leaded.
Got it. More calls after the break. Oksana Exell, Provincial Director of Canadian Federation of Independent Business. David Schreck, the Pacific Group. CUNC is the way I think of you. And Doug Hayhurst, Price Waterhouse and Company on this call. You can barely see that far nowadays. Go ahead from Castlegar.
Yes, Jack. I'm phoning in regards to the 3% tax that was levied in the middle of 1986 for an 18-month period. I can't remember what it was for, but in turn, was that reversed as of 88? Has it been dropped?
The surtax you're talking about. Doug?
No, it's still there. It's going ahead as planned. It was started in the middle of the year, and now it'll be for the full year. And that's one reason why personal taxes go up.
That'll be 6% this year.
No, 3%. It was
On the whole year
on the
instead.
whole year instead of just half a year.
So it'll double.
That's right.
Our view is that when he brings in BTT, if he brings in, he'll do away with the manufacturer sales tax, the corporate surtax, and the capital banking.
Any chance of him doing a Pocklington?
No. They considered it, I think, in talking to the bureaucrats in Ottawa. That's not part of their game plan.
Thank you. Well, you can
we have to remember a fellow called McEachran, who went in with the best of intentions to do tax reform. Now, we all agree there should be tax reform. You know, folks like you and me should pay some tax. We shouldn't get away with paying no tax. But McEachran went in making these minor changes, and you know what happened? The entire country jumped on him, and he was made a laughing stock. That could happen to Wilson.
Well, he had a head
careful.
start on being a laughing stock anyway. Go ahead, please.
Jack, just a couple of quick questions that I'm going to hang up. To Mr.
Hayhurst.
Mr. Hayhurst, tremendous comments. I absolutely agree with you. Mr. Schreck, you're terribly, terribly negative, sir. Very negative. It's about time you got positive and helped the budget. Very, very good budget, Jack.
What about
Oksana? I think we could help the...
Very, very positive lady. I enjoy her comments. Mr. Schreck, you've got to get more positive.
Well, let me be positive. I'll make a positive suggestion to Mr. Wilson and Mr. Mulrooney. That is that your recent scandals are nothing. Your economic performance is the real scandal. Do the country a favor and resign.
Oh, that's a good, strong left-wing NDP statement. Go ahead from Winfield.
Hello there.
Yeah.
Basically, I just have one comment. Recently, we've got an increase in wages, thanks to Provincial there, of $4 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And locally here in Winfield, myself, we employ about 5 people, and we've increased their wages accordingly. But now I see their buying power going down, you see, because of the increase of gas.
You're talking about the minimum wage.
That's right. The minimum wage goes up, and our buying power goes down due to this tax increase. So where are we ahead?
Wait until May. You'll find that when you get the May budget, Mr. Wilson obviously believes if you put money in the hands of the consumer, then you'll have the buying power and the whole place will go.
Thank you. Do you believe him? No, you don't. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack. Just a couple of questions, and then I'll hang up and listen for Doug and your lady panelist.
Oksana.
It's funny, like Phil had mentioned all the scandals. Now, if we take all those people, take all the money that they've derived out of the companies, and take what they're going to retire with for the rest of their lives, put it back into the tax system, we've made a bit of money. For the lady, the 5 years of growth in BC, Expo's come and gone. That growth is gone.
Totally.
Eh?
Well, I think I took into consideration the fact that Expo is just a blip on the horizon, and it's a growth that's taken place over the last 5 years. It has nothing to do with Expo, so there is a net new net.
I've got a great
growth.
idea to research the economy. Turn BC Stadium into a massive luxury gambling casino, eh? And I'm
then tax
joking.
it.
I'm joking. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack, I think the people in BC should be screaming bloody murder over this budget. Wilson went on a big randu about how Alberta has problem with the oil and the Atlantic problems have unemployment and the farmers in the prairies have problems with the wheat. He never even mentioned BC, period. Not one damn thing about BC, and I'm a bit mad over it.
I tried to make the point off the top. Absolutely nothing visible for the West. Am I not correct in that?
Well, sure. He even avoided mentioning the International Banking Centre proposal, and that's surprising as well.
Twice.
Well, the fact is, and you have your guests sitting there saying that it sounds like a great budget come down for the province, and I just can't see anything on it. I wonder, just off the top of my head, if they're punishing us for what Vandersam is saying out in the news. Thank you.
Do any of you want to take that?
Twice in the budget speech, he started talking about regional inequities, recognizing that BC is an economic disaster zone. In the introduction, he came on strong, then he went off on other topics. Middle of the speech, he went on for almost a minute on regional inequities, and then he dropped it and said nothing more and
But
did
he is
nothing.
consistent in his performance. He doesn't believe that a government program is going to fix
agree.
regional inequities, and he just stays away from it.
But he knows they're there,
Yeah,
and
but
he
they do
said it loud
believe
and
that
clear.
his government is committed to fix regional inequities by the CF-18 and or the polar icebreaker for the West Coast.
That's not the Minister of Finance. That's the other ministers.
Well, they should all be on the same wage line.
Mr. Wilson is on one wavelength and is very consistent in it, which makes me very happy.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack. Both of my questions relate, I guess, to the gasoline tax. And one is, how can we compete on the international market against our American counterpart when we're paying absorbent prices for our energy, namely gasoline? And two, how can we maintain a holiday program for Canada when it's now cheaper, even despite the rate of exchange, to go south of the border to spend our holidays?
Well, I don't know about that one. Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, driving costs are cheaper that he's talking about. I think that a lot of the other costs in the States are pretty high when you pay the exchange.
Sure are.
But what's interesting is just this last week we heard in the news gas stations on the Saskatchewan and Manitoba border complaining about losing customers across the line in the States.
As we do here.
Precisely. And what we have is at the time that they are screaming that they are losing local customers to stations right across the line, we have the gas tax increasing.
But
On the other hand,
You can see the lineups at Blaine and Bellingham
I know,
for
we've
anybody
seen
who lives along the border.
Right?
you have to remember he's just announced a change in terms of the federal sales tax will be now collected at the manufacturing level in terms of the oil companies instead of at the gasoline station or at the from the gasoline owner operator. So there's a slight, there's a little
depends whether that gets passed.
And don't forget too, we have an excellent socialized health system in Canada. And for all the benefits south of the border, there are 37 million Americans who have no hospital insurance at all. And we've got to pay for that one way or another.
Somewhere that's coming from our pockets.
No, of course. The question is, how do we pay for it? Do we pay for it a fair and equitable way, or do we have a tax that those who can afford to pay the most pay the least?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased you were here tonight. Oksana Exell. In one word, you say it's as much as you expected.
And even better than that, I think we got to retain some of the goodies from the last budget.
I'll be positive, Jack. This budget could have been far worse. It's merely a minor disaster.
I'm happy it appears that Mr. Wilson's in control.
And I'll be back about the compensation board. My other guest, Doug Hayhurst, Senior Tax Advisor at Price Waterhouse, and David Schreck of CUNC and the Pacific Group, after the break. Board comes under heavy attack from time to time, and often it can slide. The Workers' Compensation Board comes under heavy attack from time to time, and often it can slide away from the point and pretend that they are saintly in all respects. But when a judge of the Supreme Court of British Columbia says that in a specific case, the board was argumentative, petulant, patently unreasonable, and denied a worker natural justice, it's more embarrassing for them. This is the case of Angelo Testa, 50-year-old skilled construction worker, injured twice, and I have asked Barbara Bluman, his lawyer, to come and just give me the facts in the case about Angelo Testa. It's difficult, not difficult to follow, but it's difficult to understand how this could happen to an injured workman in British Columbia. When did it all start?
In 1983, Mr. Testa suffered an arm injury, and he was on workers' compensation benefits for a period of approximately 6 months. At the conclusion of the 6-month period, the Workers' Compensation Board advised him that he was fine and he could return to work. Mr. Testa, who was a very experienced heavy-duty equipment operator, disagreed with that and said it would be quite dangerous for him to return to work in that condition, appealed that decision. Subsequent to filing this appeal, Mr. Testa decided that he would try to return to work, and in 1984
because that's what they wanted him to do.
Exactly.
He'd injured an arm in the first accident. They said back to work after 6 months, you're fit for the work again. He appealed that, and then on his own volition he decided to go to work with his not fully recovered arm.
Exactly. And he returned to work, and as he predicted, he suffered another injury within 1 week of returning to work. The Workers' Compensation Board turned this claim down altogether, and Mr. Testa filed an appeal of that decision as well. And the two appeals were heard together by the Workers' Compensation Review Board, which is a quasi-independent review board that hears appeals of workers from decisions of the Workers' Compensation Board. It's composed of 3 people. One is a chairman, the other is a background in management from the employer side, and the other has a background from the union.
These are the famous boards of review,
exactly.
Are they?
Yes.
Which have often been subject to criticism because of delay in their decisions.
The same boards of review. And this one, actually, the delay was not too bad. They heard the decision, and they allowed Mr. Testa's claim. In total, they found that he was correct in his judgment that he could not return to work in 1983, and that the claim in 1984 should be allowed. Normally, one would expect that to be the end of the matter. However, the claim was then what they call referred to the commissioners, and the commissioners took a look at the thing and decided, in essence, that overturn the entire decision. They refused to implement anything.
So the boards of review had said both claims are allowable. He was injured properly, or injured under the regulations in the first one, had been ordered back to work, goes back to the second one, is injured again, and he was he at that time refused compensation on the second injury?
He was refused compensation on the second injury altogether. What the commissioners did, their ruling was quite bizarre because they, as I say, they didn't exactly say, no, we don't agree with anything the review board says. What they concluded was, well, perhaps the board is right, the review board is right, we should have allowed the 1984 claim, but then said in terms of wage rate, he should be getting wages based upon what he earned in the year immediately preceding the second injury. Well, of course, he'd been off work because of his earlier injury. And the result of the decision is he got nothing.
Just a minute. They took the 2 favorable reviews of the boards of review. And do they have the authority just to kind of cast aside what the board of review says?
Well, they take the position that they do. Indeed, it was quite bizarre in the sense that Mr. Testa testified in an open hearing before the review board, and the decision of the commissioners was made based upon the file that in fact was the subject of the appeal. They did not even have a transcript of what Mr. Testa said before the review board.
So they reviewed the evidence without seeing what he said in front of the review board.
Exactly.
But then you give me this incredible twist here. When they said he could be compensated for the second accident, but only on the basis of his earnings the year before when he did the first accident, how much compensation would he have got from that?
He got nothing. It's a total catch-22 he was put into. They say, yes, we'll allow the claim, but we're going to use your wages in the year that we know and you know that you weren't working.
But just a minute, what about his compensation for the first accident?
The compensation for the first accident was based upon what they have a maximum wage rate in the statute, and he was receiving it because he was such a high income earner. He was earning in excess of the maximum compensation payable.
Yeah.
So for the first injury, he was receiving benefits, the maximum benefits the Workers' Compensation Board can pay. For the second, they're saying you didn't lose anything as a result of this injury. We know you had a bad injury, but we don't think it's costing you any money. That, in effect, is what they said.
Should he have got more for the second injury, even though he was getting full payment for the first injury?
But he was not receiving any money for the first injury because they had terminated him. They refused to implement the review board's decision with respect to the first injury.
So he was getting nothing for the first injury,
exactly,
even though the review board wanted him to be paid for it. And on the second injury, which they accepted because it was cheaper in their thinking, they said, you made nothing the year before, ipso facto, no pension.
Ipso facto, no benefits at all.
Jeez, so. Now, what did the judge say about all of this?
Well, first of all, the judge found that their conclusion that the wage rate should be based on a period when he had no earnings, that this was his loss of earnings, was an absurd result, and concluded that their finding that he lost nothing by reason of the second injury was patently unreasonable. And in law, when a court finds that something is patently unreasonable, it's a very significant term. The courts cannot intervene for a decision they don't like or because they think that the review board has made, or that the Workers' Compensation Board has made a decision which is wrong or they don't like. It has to be, the term is patently unreasonable, it has to be basically an absurd result.
Wasn't the word petulant also used?
Yes, the word petulant was used, and that was in reference to the decision itself. And the tone of the decision was described by the judge as petulant.
Mm-hmm. And why was it a denial of natural justice as outlined by Mr. Justice Alan McDonnell?
Well, the concept in law of natural justice basically means you did not allow someone to properly and fairly put their case before the tribunal.
Because presumably the Compensation Board, the top people, make the decision away from the arena of battle altogether.
Exactly. They're totally away from the real nuts of the case, Mr. Testa, and what he has to say and his side of the story. All they've got is a lot of written documents which put together by lots of different people, some of whom may or may not have seen each other, a lot of rumors passed on from document to document. And at the review board, that's the only opportunity the worker has to really tell his side of the story.
Now, having won this decision, a landmark decision, no doubt about it at all, how much does Mr. Testa get now?
Well, according to my calculations, and I say that because we're still in a dispute with the Workers' Compensation Board, according to my calculations, in back pay he should be receiving $60,000, and he should also receive a full pension.
Which would be about what?
About $20,000, sorry, $2,000 per month.
Now, do you now have to go to court to get them to agree with the figures of compensation, even though the judge said denial of natural justice, patently unreasonable, petulant, etc., etc.?
Well, I would hope not. At the present time, we have not agreed upon the terms of the order, so we are in court on that aspect. We haven't, I put the proposal to the board to make a settlement on that basis, but so far I have not heard anything from them indicating that they are prepared to implement it on that basis.
All right, I get scores of calls in every year about how people have been denied justice by the WCB, and they can always tell me 92% of our cases are settled without any fuss or furor at any time. Do you feel that the board is deliberately cutting back on compensation to save money?
There's no question in my mind. I've been practicing in this area of law for many years, and there is no question in my mind that in particular since 1983, the board has been cutting back and basically cutting back on its responsibilities to compensating injured workers. And I think perhaps it's most and best illustrated by the board's own statistics in their annual reports. I have here a chart of the figures in their annual reports with respect to fatalities. Now, I like the fatalities because we know there's an injury. There's no dispute. Somebody was hurt, somebody's dead. It shows that from 1982 to 1985, the number of fatalities reported to the board and accepted by the board. So there's a number of fatalities reported, number accepted. 85% were accepted in 1982. Only 62% were accepted in 1985. Now, I don't have the statistics for 1986, but I did check with the board's statistics department, and less claims were accepted in 1986 than in 1985.
Very telling. Just let me glance at that 1 second so I get it in my own mind. In 1982, there were 85 accepted fatalities, people killed in British Columbia. 85% of 176 fatalities.
176 fatalities were accepted out of 208 reported.
And now in 85, 126 accepted out of 202 reported, for a ratio of only 62%.
Exactly. And in 1986, the statistics show only 120 were accepted. So the numbers are still going down.
I think you made your point. Well, we'll see what Mr. Nielsen has to say about this case. I'll be back after the break. I've spoken to Mr. Nielsen, and he's going to be on the program one night early next week. Jim Nielsen, who's now the chairman of the WCB, just to go over that one little bit again. After it leaves the boards of review, where they got the favourable decisions, who overrides them? The 3 commissioners of the Compensation Board.
No one overrides the 3 commissioners of the Workers' Compensation Board.
But they're the supreme power.
They're like the Supreme Court of Canada. They're the Supreme Court of the workers' compensation system.
And you can't just straight up sue on behalf of a working man because he's given away his rights in place of compensation.
Yes, our workers' compensation system is based upon the premise that the worker gives up his right to sue his employer, and in return he has this system of providing benefits through this agency called the Workers' Compensation Board. Mm-hmm. And it's a quid pro quo. That,
do you think there's need for a full-scale investigation of all of the operations of the Workers' Compensation Board?
Yes, I do.
It must be 20 years since we had one.
It's been, I believe it's exactly 20 years. 1967 was the Tyso report.
Now, I don't know what kind of calls we're getting, because you open the phones and compensation boards, anything can happen. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
Yes, the reason I was calling is I'm on compensation now for a knee injury that I received. And what happened is they're paying me a rate right now where they say that I'm below the minimum standard, okay? And what they've done there is not accepted a claim that I was working during a period of time that I can't prove, unfortunately, because nobody gave me a T4 slip. And I wondered what I could do to solve that.
Barbara Bluman.
Well, traditionally, the Workers' Compensation Board does work by looking at documentary evidence to prove a wage rate. There is reluctance to accept that just strictly on the word of the worker. The only thing you could perhaps do is try to find those people who had employed you and perhaps get a letter from them or something of that nature, which would document that you did indeed work for this person and you earned a certain amount of money.
That would help anyway.
That's
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack. In April last year, I was left 12% disabled with an accident, and I'm going to school now under a decision 62C, and they allotted 8 months, and my course takes 2 years. But when they're paying my rehabilitation, they only pay it, like they want to pay it out over the whole 2 years instead of 8 months.
Does that make sense to you? Do you understand that?
Yes, I understand that, and Decision 62C basically sets the criteria that the board has to apply in setting out or providing workers with rehabilitation assistance. It's hard to know in your case what exactly happened, but if they've approved a 2-year course, I'm surprised they're not paying for the full 2-year period.
On the face of it, 2-year course should bring 2 years payment.
Exactly.
And he can go to the board and complain if he hasn't got a lawyer or a loud union.
That's right. And what he should think of doing is appealing that to the review board, and hopefully it won't be overturned by the commissioners.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes. In all respect to the commission, I think that perhaps that these cases that this lady is talking about are minimal as opposed to those cases that are generally processed by the commission. And I think that they should be commended for doing the work that they do and not just generally be put down for the work that they don't do.
She's saying that people are too hard on the compensation boards.
Well, I don't believe that. I think that the last few years, the Workers' Compensation Board has systematically been trying to cut down its costs, and it's cutting down its costs by accepting less claims, and on those claims it accepts by paying out less benefits on those claims. And I think that the criticism we've been seeing in the last while is justified.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, and I want to congratulate Barbara for what she's done. It is a landmark case. I happen to be the president of the IWARA, the Injured Workers Alternative Recourse Association, and I am dealing with a lot of cases just exactly as she's talking about now. But there is always a chance to appeal any case. It doesn't matter what it is. And she is answering the questions that are asking, and when I started out to ask a few questions.
Yeah, but you've either got to have a union to put up the legal fees or put them up yourself. And
That's right. It's
even
the
Barbara
legal
admit
cost, and this is what our organization is here for to do, is to help these people, because I know they can't all go ahead like Mr. Testa did and hire a lawyer.
Good. Thank you for your call. And best of luck, too. Go ahead, please.
Jack, just wondering, I was hurt a few years ago in a logging accident, and now I'm wondering if I hurt my arm or something, and would they disallow my pension?
Which
Hang up
pension?
and wait for your answer.
No, which pension? You talking about Compensation Board or IWA?
Compensation.
I don't see why your other injury would affect your pension that you're receiving for other injuries.
Fair enough. Go ahead from Abbotsford.
Hi, Jack. Barbara, I have a couple things I'd like to ask you. My injury was in 1981. I did have my own business. I have won my medical appeal. I went to Workers' Advisory, won an appeal there. I just got a letter from the commissioners that when you stated send letters, proof of income, because I hadn't filed the tax, new business 10 months old, I haven't got proof of income, so I don't get wage loss.
Yeah, well, that is the kind of problem you face because, as I say, the Workers' Compensation Board does work relying primarily upon documentary evidence. And
documentary evidence that I had, Barbara, I have letters from all the businesses I did the work for. They're backing me up.
Have you appealed this at all?
I've had one medical appeal. I'm only 7% disabled, yet they pay my wheelchair, and I can't go out of the home and work. I'm in constant pain. They've even investigated me. I have RCMP where they've investigated me like a criminal.
Oh, just a minute. Do they use the RCMP for investigation? I find that hard to believe.
Certainly, I have never had that experience. They do have investigators who work for the board and are board employees, but I've certainly never come across a case where they've used RCMP.
Now, we can't go into that case in detail. Was it the 7% disability?
I can show you the letter.
Just a minute. That's the last thing I want to see is every compensation case in the country. But the 7% put you in the wheelchair, did it?
Pardon me?
Did the 7% disability put you in a wheelchair?
Well, no, I can't walk very far at one time, and at times I'm in bed for weeks on end.
What does she do, broadly speaking?
Well, I'm still not clear where you're at in the appeal system. You say you had a decision from a medical review panel and you've been awarded a 7% pension. As far as the wage rate, it strikes me that that should be appealed. Was that issue appealed?
Well, because I do receive a pension of $139, I just got a raise. Their doctor had decided my percentage. I have won my medical appeal. I have won my wage loss at that time. 2-year period, they didn't pay me. They said I could go back to work, and I couldn't. So I've won those appeals. It's gone to the commissioner's office. The commissioner's office has just sent me a letter that because I didn't file income tax,
They've got no proof of your earned income.
I have no proof, and yet I have people that I've worked for.
Yeah,
being
I've
in my
written
own...
all your letters for you. You're just going to have to try and keep fighting them.
That's right.
And that's time up. Barbara Bluman, thank you very much for the Testa story. I'll take it up with Jim Nielsen, find out if they're going to pay the money without legal action. I'll be back after the break. Lyle Island tomorrow with Tom McMillan, the Federal Environment Minister, at 5 p.m. precisely.